there's Mamowski. All right, ready for the timer whenever you say. Oinky doinky. So happy to do the law again. I'm in a good mood. And the one hurting worse than ever. Alright, so today we will begin with Shemot, which is also called Exodus, chapter 31, verse 11. Literally in English it would translate out as, and, there would be an arrow, because it points to something, and, arrow, oil, the anointing, and arrow, incense, the spices, to holy, or for holy, can be either one, as all that command I you, he do they. Alright, so it says ve'et, which is the word and, it's the conjunction. It can also be used for the word but. It can be sometimes used for the word now, though I don't really agree with that in English. You see people do it, though. Anywho, it's a conjunction, and then it has the pointer that's connected to it, and then it says shemen. Well, shemen is oil. It's the fat. It's fatness. A feast of fat things. Speaking of fat, boy, I got that way this year, haven't I? Anywho, it's fat because they used it as lighting oil, and some fats smell good, so they were used as incense, which is the case here. Then it says ha-mishcha, that's the anointing, to anoint a portion. Mishcha. We'll just leave it with the anointing, or to anoint. And this is ve'et, and, with an arrow, ketoret, incense, or for incense, the part of an animal which was commonly burned, the fat, like I was saying a while ago. This is more a specific word, but it's basically the same thing. It's fat, but this is the fat that smells, I guess, more like an incense. I mean, some fat can smell good, but that's because it smells like someone's cooking a steak, right? Alright, so we have ha-samim, the spices. Spices, incense, of odors, aroma. And this is la kodesh, which is literally to, but you can use it for the word for, so for holiness, for, it's something that's for the purpose of being set aside as holy, but we're really working on kodesh, the word for holy. What is holy? A holy thing. A thing consecrated to God, especially in silver, consecrated in the temple, a sanctuary, because the assumption here is that the sanctuary is going to be used for your God and your God alone. You see things like these Messianic Jews, I call them Messianic Christians, that, you know, they have their services in a Christian church, which is literally a different God. So a place that's supposedly set aside for the Christian God is now being used for the Jewish God, if you will. That ought not happen. If it's set aside for Yahweh God, that should be the only God that's being worshipped in that temple. Now, even the temple itself couldn't hold up to that, because when the Jews sinned and God took his protection from them because of their sin, it's not so much that, I shouldn't really say it that way. That's really kind of a Christian idea, though you hear Christians, you hear Jews talk this way. But it's not that God takes his hedge of protection away from the Jews. It's that the Jews step outside the fence. And once you've done that, and I'm not talking the fence of Torah, I'm talking about the fence of protection that comes with living according to God's law. His law is there to protect us. We step outside of his law, we step outside of our covenant, the protection is gone. So, no, you can't move the temple outside of, where it's supposed to be, and that's what makes it unsafe. Is that when the people step outside of God's law, that protection even for the temple is gone. And so the Hasmoneans came in, the Romans came in, if you can actually consider them two different things, but it is two different time periods, but sort of. But anyway, the idea here being that, there was a time when somebody went in and set up a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies, and he was worshipped in the Holy of Holies, Zeus, the fake god that was made up in somebody's head. And they carved something out of stone and stuck it in there in the, it's not like he actually heard what people were saying to him. It's not like he actually said anything to them. It's not like his hands ever touched them. You know what I'm saying? But people did worship. So that's a place that was set aside for the real God, but was used in a way that, a fake God was served there. So what happened? The holy became unholy. The clean became unclean. The pure became impure. Not supposed to happen. So, but when God's people don't follow God's law, they become unholy. They become unpure, or impure, I should say. But the idea here is that when something is set aside for God, that's the only use that it's supposed to be used for. So we can't serve God Yahweh God on Saturday and then serve the Christian God, if you will, or the Catholic God, or the Hindu God, or whatever on Sunday. Did I say Sunday twice? Yahweh God on Saturday, other gods on Sunday. You can't do that, because you take the clean and make it unclean, the pure and make it impure, if you follow what I'm saying. If it's set apart for God, it is only supposed to be used for that purpose. And so we think of the utensils in the tabernacle as being set aside for God, and that's the only thing they're supposed to be used for, and that's all good and well. But the clothing that they wore, that was the same thing. It was supposed to be only used in the service of God, and that's the way they did things. Well, I do the same thing with the clothing. The things that you see me in on Saturday are only worn on Saturday or on the holidays, things like that, because it's only used in the service for God. It's not that it's used only for Shabbat, because God's here every day and all that kind of stuff. Well, won't you wear it every day? Well, I'm not in the service of God every day. Sometimes I go out and mow my lawn. That's not in the service of God. That's in the service of me. So we don't mix those things up, right? And then if we're supposed to be in the service for God, what should that tell us all? If we're being told to be a holy people and a holy nation, what should that bring to our mind? We should only be serving God. We should not be serving some fake God. Does that mean that you shouldn't own a house, or shouldn't make payments to a car, or borrow money from a bank to buy a house? No, I don't mean any of those things. But it does mean that we should live according to God's law every day. So if we decide to buy a house and we say, well, let's pray about it, let's find out what God's will is, well, it's really easy to know what God's will is. You don't even have to look it up in a book. It's real simple. God doesn't want us to live beyond our means. That's part of the law. That's the whole reason in paying tithe, is to teach us to live within our means. That's to my mind, the whole reason behind it. It does help keep the place where God puts His name. Can I say it that way? Because it's not always the temple. Sometimes it's your synagogue. Sometimes it's, some rented place down on Main Street. Whatever it is where God has put His name, that money helps take care of those things, right? We know that. But it's also supposed to take care of the man who teaches, and his family is supposed to be used in him being able to pay his rent and utilities. All of that's part of it, sure. But how do we know if we're buying the right house? Well, if buying the right house is going to keep us from paying our tithe and our offering, you are out of God's will. Pure and simple. It was not God's will for you to get it in the first place. And like, I meet people, I haven't done this recently, but I used to meet people all the time telling me about the miracle that they got from God. They bought this house that they thought they could never afford. And I'm sitting here thinking, I wonder what would happen if I could ask them certain questions and they would answer me truthfully. Okay, so you had this great miracle from God. Have you stopped paying your tithe because now you can no longer afford to pay that and your rent or your mortgage? Have you stopped making your offerings because now you're unable to do so? Have you stopped going to uh, the place where God has His name 3 times a year because you can no longer? If you've done that, you're living in sin. It's that simple. So that's how we are a holy people. We live according to God's law. We don't go beyond our means. I mean, yes, sometimes we get beyond our means because when we bought the house, we were within our means, right? We had a good job, we were paying our bills, things were going well, and then the layoffs came. So that's a little bit different story. That's just the economy, and that stuff happens to pretty much everybody at some point. That just unfortunately nothing you can do about it sometimes. But you got to do the best you can to make it right, even if it means filing bankruptcy. Yes, you may have to do that. That's what these laws are set up for. And by the way, bankruptcy is set up on the idea of the year of Jubilee. Hello, that's where we got that idea. So anyway, we have to do the thing. If we can make the payment, we should be making the payment. We should not just be holding back just because we don't want to, just because we want to save up for something else. No. Okay. Anyway, holy people pay their bills. They live within their means to the best of their abilities. Sometimes even holy people who live within their means get stuck, because that's life. That's the resistance. Not that there's a devil running around doing bad things. It's just that there's a resistance to everything. There's a resistance to me just running my hand through the air like this. There's air pressure. I'm pushing against it. There's resistance to everything. Even breathing in and breathing out has a resistance against it. God created it that way, and by the way, it's perfect. God did not mess up, people. The way He created this earth is perfect. The way He created humans is perfect. It's exactly the way He wanted it to be. He's not going to come back and blow everything up and kill everybody off so that He can straighten out His mess. No. Oh, man. Let's get off the holy thing. Kehol is our next word. Literally, that's as all, because it's the word kol, which is all, everything, all-inclusive, nothing left out, that kind of a thing. But they put the k sound in the front of it, the kaf, as it's actually called. That means as all, or according to all. So we usually say according to all that, or accordingly. Accordingly is fine. So anyway, you're going to have that word, something like that. Then it says asher, according to that. That's the word for that. According to that which. You can even say that which for asher. It's fine, because that's basically what it would mean in Hebrew if you were speaking English in Hebrew. Okay, I'm confused. Ziviticha. So that's command I you, in the way we say it, which is improper, but we would say, I command you. I commanded you, because it is a past tense thing. So it's to set up, to constitute, to appoint anyone over anything, to appoint, to decree, to determine anything, to cause. It's to constitute. Where else have we heard that word? Constitution. That's what founds this country. That's the cornerstone, right? So if we begin to chisel away at the cornerstone and say, you know what, we know our Constitution only gives the federal government 3 responsibilities, but we're all lazy now, and so we want them to take on more jobs that they were not supposed to, jobs that we're supposed to do for ourselves. Then we start to chip away at the cornerstone. And eventually people, lawyers are standing there holding up their hands saying, I swear to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And then once you're sworn in as president or a Supreme Court justice, after you've done that, after you've sworn in front of God and everybody that you're going to uphold and defend the Constitution, then you say, well, I don't really believe in the Constitution. You're chipping away at the foundation of your country, because that's what to constitute is. And this is the word we're looking at here, to set up, to constitute. This is the cornerstone, if you will. And so these are what the commands are. Part of the Constitution is the fact that it's laws. You're not allowed to kill. You're supposed to be allowed to say anything you want to. What do they call them? Butterflies? No, that's not the right word. Snowflakes. The snowflakes of today chiseling away at all of our rights. And they have no idea what that's, they're inside the building chiseling away at all of the rights that we have, chiseling away at our Constitution, chiseling away at our foundation. What's going to happen at some point? The building's going to fall on top of them. It's just common sense. All right, so we got the word for command figured out. Then this is Ya'asu. Are you hearing asa? To produce, to labor, to manufacture, to work, to fabricate. It's all that stuff, so we're making something, obviously. So we have, the translation then is, and the anointing oil, and the incense spices for the sanctuary, the holy. That's the thing that's holy is the sanctuary. They called the sanctuary the holy. HaKodesh, the sanctuary. It's an idiom. They will make all that I have commanded you. So I should read that again. And the anointing oil and the incense spices for the sanctuary, they will make, this is where you're producing, manufacturing, they will make all that I have commanded you. All right? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Took me a long time to do that, huh? Verse 12, literally would be, and he said, Yahweh, to Moshe to say. Well, now we've already had this. So what's happening? Have we learned what happens when we have this sentence? It's not a change of subject, if you will. The subjects don't change very often in Hebrew. But it's a change of, what is the word we've been using? A thread would be a good idea. It's a change of the thread. It's like putting the bullet points. You remember that? The subject is still blah, 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 but then you have the bullet points, so we're switching to another bullet point. So even though it's kind of changing subjects, or the idea of the strand or whatever, something is changing, yes, but the subject, the overall subject does not change. I had a word for that. I can't think of what it is. Topic. Is that the good word? A change of topic. Now, Kasuto said that with the command to build the tabernacle, now comes the command to cease from building it, the tabernacle, on the Shabbat. So first you had the set of commands about building the tabernacle, and so now we're going to talk about not doing that on the Shabbat. All right, so verse 13 literally would be, and you speak to children Yisrael to say indeed, Shabbat's my. So the Sabbaths belong to God, in other words. You shall guard it for sign she between me and between you. So it's the feminine, but it means it. So it's a sign between myself and between you. To generations, you all. So to all your generations, in other words, it's never going to go away. To know, for all your generations to know. Then he says, for I, Yahweh, from holy, and that'll make sense later. Ve'ata, and you, daber. So you're going to speak. But remember, this is setting in a row, ranging in an order, to lead, to guide. These are not just words you're going to speak off the top of your head. You think this through. You put these things together, and you make sure, to the best of your ability, that people understand what you're talking about. Don't just go, blah, 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 blah. You got it, right? No. Lay it out there. Think about it. Put it out there so that your words will lead these people to the conclusions that you need to lead them to. All right, so then this is El, that's the word to, T-O, Bene. So you're going to say it to, you're going to speak these words, you're going to arrange these words in an order and in a row. You're going to make sure that the children of Catholicism, No. The children of Hinduism. No. The children of Zoroastrianism. No, it's the children of Yisrael. Lemur, to say. So you're going to work up all these words that are going to lead and guide them, and you're going to say them to the children of Yisrael. Ach, indeed, surely, there is no doubt. It's kind of a behold type of a word, right? Ach et Shabbatotai. So those are my Sabbaths, my Shabbatot. This is God saying, these are my Sabbaths. They belong to God. And of course, Shabbat is your root word, and its idea is to rest, to keep as a day of rest, if you will. The primary idea appears to be that of to sit down, to sit still, used of men as opposite to labor, which I have no idea what that means, of land which is not tilled, to rest from labor, abstaining from journeying, which is really not so much what that word means at all in any way, shape, or form. But once you get the idea of a Sabbath day's journey, then the meaning of the word begins to, it's like art imitating life, or life imitating art. It didn't start out that way, but at some point it becomes that way. It becomes the meaning, though the meaning was to rest, to respire, and eventually it was not to travel, because the thinking was, if you're traveling, you're not resting, right? Anyway, so then it says, Tishimoro. So that's from shamar, which is, well, literally, this word is, you shall guard it. So it's from the word of guarding. But it's to keep, to watch, in a narrow sense, as a garden, a man tending to his garden. So you're going to tend to something. And to tend to a garden, you have to pay attention to how much water your plants need. Maybe they need some, what you call that? Fertilizer, you know. And certainly you got to pull away the weeds. I was out by the road yesterday, and one of our neighbors that walks through our neighborhood stopped and talked to me, and while we were talking, I noticed that there was this vine thing that had grown all up in the rose bush. So I was standing there talking to her, just yanking ass, like, what in the world is this? It was just in the one, and I'd never noticed it in there before, but that's my job. I was tending to my garden. And we do this, we're tending to it, we're observing it, we're keeping it, we're making sure that it's taken care of, right? And then the next word, so what are we keeping, taking care of? The Shabbat. We're making sure that the Shabbat is taken care of, that it's done the way it's supposed to be done, that we're doing what we're supposed to do on the Shabbat, even if doing nothing is what we're supposed to do, right? Then it says ki, which means for, or because. Ot. That's the word for sign. Because it's a sign. And a sign, of course, you can think of that as a military flag, right? Because you can, or like the flags that the tribes used to use. They held up their flag, and oh, there's the tribe of Yehuda, or there's the tribe of Binyamin. So, because, you know, if you are just showing up and you're from the tribe of Yehuda, you're probably supposed to go over there and be with that tribe. So they have a great big old flag up in the air so that you can see where you're supposed to be. You know, so that's what those were for. A standard is what they're often called, but it's still a sign. So it's what you think of. You're driving down the road and there's signs all over the place. You know, take a right here and it's your exit or whatever. You get the idea. And then it says heave, which literally is she. It's the word for it in Hebrew. It's just in the feminine here. I don't see how that's feminine. Let's go with masculine. I don't see how that word is feminine. The use here, it's feminine or masculine in my mind. Anyway, so this is Beini, which is Bain is between, so Beini is between me. So it's a sign between me, and this is God speaking, so it's a capital M. Between me, then it says U benechem, and between you. Ledorotechem, to generations, you all. This is God saying you all again. See, God was kind of a Texan. An age, generation of men, as if the period and circuit of the years of life, habitation, it's the word for generations, right? So it's to all the generations, la da'at, that's to know, to see, hence to perceive, to acquire knowledge, to be acquainted with. It includes the action of knowing both as commencing and as completed. The signification both of seeing and knowing, to know, to perceive, to be aware, whether it's by the eyes, or by the touch, or by the mind, and hence to understand. It's to get to know, it's to discover, whether by seeing or hearing, or by experience, to become acquainted with. So what does it sound like God's telling you? You're going to have to put some effort into it, aren't you? You're probably going to have to pass it on to your children if it's going to be known and perceived and acquired by your generations. Then it says key, which is for because I need. This is God saying, because I. Then he says God's name, Yahweh, right? And in case you guys don't know, I say God's name. Now I know this, nobody actually knows how to pronounce God's name. I know that 10 Jews just jumped up and said, I do. No, you don't. Nobody does. We don't have a recording of Moshe saying God's name. We don't have a recording of David saying God's name. And believe me, they did. The idea for not saying God's name, that's a very late development in Judaism. They say that it started in the 1st century. I don't buy it. I think it started in the Dark Ages and was shoved into the 1st century. Just like the whole idea about the oral law. It did not start at Sinai. It was shoved into Sinai. They want it to be true, they stick it back there, right? So I don't see the evidence of it actually existing, because the documentation that we have that takes God's name out does not go back that far. Now the subject matter does, but that doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. So to me, if the Word of God that we have, and by the way, we only have half of it. How do I know? Because there are verses all throughout the Bible that talk about the book of this and the book of that. And we don't have them. It comes out to about half. And the half that we do have, the name of God shows up almost 8,000 times. And by the way, foreign kings and foreign slaves knew and pronounced his name audibly and wrote it down on pieces of paper. Well, not paper. Lambskin, that sort of thing. Chiseled it in stone. They didn't have a problem with the saying of God's name. But once this thing started, all of a sudden only one man could say it once a year when he went into a place that didn't exist anymore. What? Come on. So what have you done? You've taken something that was obviously okay with God for people to say. It was obvious. Oh no, well, it was okay for David to say it. He was beloved of God. It was okay for Moshe to say it. It was okay for those people because they were special. Yeah. That same book tells us that God is no respecter of person either. That he sees no man above the other. So if one man can say it, all men can say it. If one man can't say it, no man can. So you have to keep that stuff in mind. But what bothers me is that in God's Word, it's 8,000 times. it was obviously important to God that his name be known, that his name be said. How long would you stay married to your spouse if you refused to call her by her name? If you insisted on calling her the name, the place, the thing? How about that? Does that speak of an intimate knowledge of that person? Does it speak of an intimate relationship with that person? No, it does none of those things. But what bothers me the most is one of the first things that God said was, don't take his name in vain. And I know for the most part that's not literally, it's his authority. Don't take his Torah, that's his authority over us, in vain. Don't take it to make it waste. Don't waste it away. Don't say, hey, we don't live under God's law, we live under grace. Don't do that. God, it's one of the first things God said, but it still means his name, which is Yahweh. Don't take it to vanity. And what did the Jews do when they decided all of a sudden nobody could say his name? It's the ultimate taking God's name to vain, because we no longer know exactly how to pronounce it. And until the skies open up and we all hear a voice from heaven saying God's name, and we get it on recording, or get 1,000 witnesses that all heard the same thing, there's no way we're going to know. It's that far gone. So it's the ultimate taking of God's name in vain, and I refuse to be part of it. I'm going to say his name because it was important enough that he made sure his name was in there at least, or almost, 8,000 times in the half that we do have. So I should get off of that. Next word is Mekadish Chem. Of course, you're hearing Kadosh, right? So it's from holy you, right? And that's the being pure, not doing what you shouldn't be doing, always doing what you should be doing, setting something aside for one particular thing, and that's for God. So our translation then is, and you shall speak to the children of Yisrael, saying, indeed, you shall guard my Shabbatot, my Sabbaths, for it is a sign between me. This is God speaking, between me and you. To all your generations, that you may know that I, and he says his name, that I, Yahweh, sanctify you. Man, that's incredible stuff. But of the words, guard my Shabbatot, guard my Sabbaths, Rashi wrote that building the tabernacle is not permitted on the Shabbat. I agree with that. I don't remember how he got it from this. Oh, because we're right in the middle of talking about building the tabernacle and the duties of the tabernacle, and then he takes the time to say, now, you need to keep the Shabbat. You're not keeping the Shabbat if you're working your hind end off right in the middle of it all, right? So, I have to agree with him. Of the word sign, even Ezra said that a Jew can be identified as a Jew by his observance of the Shabbat. Well, he said it in plural, Shabbatot. No. No. A lot of people are more than willing to take Saturday off and take it easy on Saturday, if they're just allowed to. No, I don't buy the whole that's the way you know. Because there are people who take Shabbat off that don't wear their fringe. They refuse under any circumstances to wear it, even though God said to. But they have traditions. And those traditions are more important than following God's law. And so they have to make up rules about it. Oh, well, you can't follow God's law when blah, blah, blah happens. Wow. Then why follow God's law at all? Why should God give you a law at all if there's some reason why you shouldn't follow it? I mean, if God said, if by some chance, and this would really, really just floor me, and I'm talking for God here, this would just floor me, but if by some chance the temple got torn down, saying, I'll protect it. I just can't even imagine someone being powerful enough to tear down my temple. Then you don't have to follow any of the laws connected to the temple. Because, boy, if we don't have a temple, then we can't have temple priests. I mean, forget it. So when Nebuchadnezzar came along, God went, wow, I did not see that coming. I really didn't think that was even possible. And then a few years later, it happens again. Oh, my goodness. But we don't count that one because we really didn't get finished. So then, a little while later, wow, look at this Herod dude. He doubled the size of this thing and made it way nicer than it was. Man, this is awesome. And then that one gets torn down. God's like, what is up? Why can't I keep this building? I really sometimes think that's what we believe. As ridiculous as that, I hope, sounds, I'm really beginning to think some people believe that. They think that God made a mistake when He created everything. He screwed it up so badly that somebody else has to come back and die and fix things. And even His death isn't good enough. He's got to come back on a horse and murderize everybody. What? Come on, people. What is that about? And then the Jews believe it too. They believe that Messiah, most of them don't believe that Messiah came and died and is coming back to finish what He started. They just believe He hasn't been here yet. He's going to come back and murderize everybody and put Israel on top of the world. Really? Well, why does all the verses that talk about Mashiach in all of the messianic passages that are throughout the entire Tanakh, why do they always talk about poor people being among us? Why do they talk about evil still being among us? Why? Think about that one a while. Just saying. Ooh, it's another big one. I better get going. All right, verse 14. And guard you the Shabbat, for holy she, or it, to you from desecrating it. Dead he dies for all the make in her workmanship, and shall be cut off her, the soul, these, from midst people her. Okay, well, obviously this is where Rashi got his idea, right? Ushemartem, and guard. He's already told us to do this. To watch, to keep, like a man with his garden. He's already said this. Guard it. So it's pointing at something what? HaShabbat. Didn't he just... Yeah, you're right. He just said this. Guard it. Why does God do that? Emphasis. Let's see if we can put it on the right syllable. All right, so key is our next word. Because Kodesh. Because it's holy. Because it is set aside. This is what you do on Saturday, every Saturday, forever. Nothing's ever going to change. Even if Mashiach comes and raises from the dead on a Sunday, you never do it on a Sunday, because this is the cornerstone. This is the law. This is the constitution that was established by the mouth of God, and nothing imperfect comes out of the mouth of God. Nothing. Everything that comes from the mouth of God is perfect, pure, holy, and eternal. Everything. So it's holy, people. It is your next word, heave. Lachem, it is holy to you. At least it's supposed to be. Mechaleha, from desecrating it. Literally. It's to perforate, to pierce through, wounded, to lose, or lay open, loose rather, or lay open. So you got this idea of if you stab somebody, they've been perforated. But blood coming out desecrates them. So, you know how Hebrew is, remember, it's a primitive word, so you've got this one word with lots of meaning instead of lots of word with no meaning, or almost no meaning. Then it says moot. That's a moot issue, people. What does that mean? That's a dead issue. Moot means dead. We get our word moot in English from the Jews. You'd be surprised how much Hebrew you speak. I'm just saying. Mut, to die the death, to kill. It's to stop breathing. It's to give up the ghost, right? So it's mut, yumat. And of course, that's like saying moot, because that's the root word, moot. But, you know, you have to change it up in Hebrew to make a sentence proper. So it's die, he dies, because it's plural now, and it's masculine. Die, he dies. Remember, that's an idiom, right? Ki, which is because, kol, which is all, ha'oseh, asa, to make, to labor, to manufacture, to produce, to build, to chisel, to do things, ba, in her. It's not really a word, it's just two Hebrew letters that get thrown together and it becomes a word. Then it's melacha, worship. Properly, it's service, hence work prescribed to anyone, especially in the work of an artisan. The property or wealth of anyone is called their workmanship. Then we have ve'nichreta, and shall be cut off her. Wow. So first you're going to die, and then they're going to cut you off. Obviously, there's some idiomatic things going on here, right? But to cut off is part of a garment. You know, take some scissors or a knife and cut off part of the garment. You're cutting something away, right? It's to cut away the branch of a tree. It's also to kill and to destroy. That you're pretty cut off if you're dead, right? Because you're cut off from breathing, you're cut off from life in general. But it's of making a covenant, so you cut off that covenant, right? But they also mean by that is that you slay an animal, so something died, right? It's cut off from life so that you can make a covenant. So they use it that way. Ha-nefesh, well, that's the soul. And it's the word for breathe. It's the breath of life. It's to exhale, because it's the breath that's coming out, right? It's the soul, the anima by which the body lives. It's a token of which life is drawing breath. Right, in Hebrew, lots of meaning with just one word kind of a thing. Then it says hahiv, so it's really like saying the it, so we say these. Then it says mikerev, from midst, interior. It's from the middle. Ameha, or ameha, ha. That's is people, and then ame makes it plural, peoples. Ha is the feminine, so you would say peoples, her, literally. But it's a people, so called from their being collected together. You call somebody a people. If we all live in America and we're all born in America, we call ourselves Americans. Some of us do. Some don't. You can say that because your skin is black, what pulls a certain group together is all their skin is black, so they call themselves the black race, or African American, or whatever. If you're all white, you call yourselves privileged. Sorry about that. Caucasian would be the word. If you're all from Asia, maybe you call yourself Asian. If you're all on a football team, maybe you call yourself, by the name of the football team. But it's something that collects everybody together. All right, so your translation. And you will guard the Shabbat, for it is holy to you. By desecrating it, you won't guard it by desecrating it. So by desecrating it, cuts himself off. But he who desecrates it, let me say that, cuts himself off from God and country. He die. So if you desecrate the Shabbat, you cut yourself off. Because all who do occupational work in it, and building a building is occupational work, that soul will separate himself. You will cut yourself off from the midst of the people. and you will guard the Shabbat, for it is holy to you. But by desecrating it, you die the death, which is to cut yourself off from God and country. You die the death. Because doing work on that day cuts your soul off from the midst of your people. You're doing it to yourself, God's not doing it to you. The word desecrating, Rashi believed that treating the Shabbat day as any other day was a desecration. It is. Unless you lay around and do nothing all day, every day, all the rest of the days. Anyway, die he die. Onkelos wrote that the penalty of death is dealt out by the courts. Rashi added, only if there are witnesses and due warning had been given to the perpetrator. So you understand that by the time Onkelos and Rashi, which are far apart, by the way, by about 1,000 years, but by the, well, maybe not that many, more like 800 or so. But what I'm trying to say is, Judaism is long since Hellenized. They've lost their understanding of idiomatic phrasing. They've lost their understanding of the phrases. Onkelos doesn't even try to use, in his translation, it's all very literal. He doesn't even try to point it out. Rashi didn't seem to know it at all. I mean, well, I shouldn't say didn't seem. He didn't. He had no clue of even the simplest of Hebrew idioms. There's some evidence that he spoke Hebrew. I doubt it seriously. But if he did speak Hebrew, it was a very different Hebrew than what was spoken when Moshe wrote these words. All right, verse 15. 6 days he do workmanship, and day the seventh, Shabbat Shabbaton, holy to Yahweh. Bow my head. That's it's not a command, but it's one of those traditions that I really love. Anyway, all that make workmanship in day the Shabbat, dead he dies, or die he dies. Right? So you know what's going on already. Sheshet, that's a word for 6. Yamim, so 6 days. 6 days. Ye'aseh, asa, to do, to work, to manufacture, to fabricate. 6 days you do your work, right? You build something or make something, or did I pass the thing? Oh. 6 days you do melacha, workmanship, properly, service, hence work prescribed to anyone, especially of the work of an artisan, the blah, blah, blah. We've already had the work. But it's saying 6 days you do your work. So if you're an artisan, you do that for 6 days. You chisel in stone, whatever it is, you chisel in stone for 6 days. If you're a scribe, you write words for 6 days. If you're a maid, you do maid service for 6 days. If you're a lawyer, you do law service for 6 days. For 6 days. 6. Not 5. 6. Uvayom. And in day, we'll just leave it at that, ha-shevi'i, so in the 7th day, shevi'i, in the 7th day, Shabbat, to rest, to keep a day of rest. The primary idea is to sit around and do nothing. Then it says Shabbaton. That's the same word, only it's in plural. Then it says Kodesh, holy, set aside for one thing and one thing only. It's resting your body. And why do you do that? Well, it's La Yahweh, for Yahweh. You're doing it for Him. Kol, that's all. Ha'oseh, all who make stuff, all who labor and perform and manufacture and produce by labor, melacha, their workmanship, the thing that they do, beyom, in that day, ha-Shabbat, in that day of the Shabbat, the 7th, the rest day, mut, dead, die, kill. Stop breathing, yumat. You hear it? Die, he dies. So your translation, 6 days, he does occupational work. But the 7th day, that is a Shabbat. That's what they mean by Shabbat, Shabbaton. It's a major rest. Shabbat, Shabbaton, literally should probably be translated major rest. And then it says, holy to Yahweh. All who do occupational work on the Shabbat day cuts himself off from God and country. You cut yourself off from God and country when you do these things. Of the words occupational work, the Babylonian Talmud in Shabbat 73a, it gives a list of 40 occupational works, less one. That's kind of a Jewish thing, isn't it? But they give 40 things of the word major rest. Rashi said it was a complete rest, not a casual rest. Wouldn't rest be casual, no matter how major it was? I'm just saying. Not that I disagree, it struck me funny, tickled my funny bone. Verse 16, and keep they children Yisrael, that's who keeps it. The children of Yisrael are going to keep this. Not the children of the Christians, not the children of the Krishnas, not the children of the whatever religion there is. It's the children of Yisrael. Oh, so since I wasn't born a Jew, I don't have to? Ay, ay, ay. People listening to me know better, right? But keep it, the children of Yisrael, because the children of Yisrael are the children that follow God's law. Anyway, so they're going to keep it. What are they going to keep? The Shabbat. To make the Shabbat to generations, them covenant eternal. This is covenant, people. Veshamru, shamar, to keep, to watch, to guard, like a man tending to his garden. It's more than just, you got to think about it. Am I doing something I ought not be doing? You got to work at getting your rest now. Isn't that funny? B'nai, that's the word for children. Yis, not yes. I know I do that all the time. Yisrael, that's how you say it. That's the children of Yisrael, the people who follow God's law. Those are the children. In Hebrew culture, Bible Hebrew culture, the student of a teacher, a more, his student was called his son. They were called, if there was a bunch of them, they were called B'nai. They were called his children. Why? Because they were his students? No, because they did what he did. They eventually taught what he taught. They didn't go out and learn from him and then say, well, I disagree with him on this, blah, blah, blah. No, they went out and taught what he taught. They did what he did. They lived their life the way he lived his life. And so they were his children. And so a man could father a child, and if that child went off and did, let's say that man was a carpenter, and then his son goes off and becomes a rabbi. That son, whose name maybe, let's say, is Yochanan, and let's say his father's name is Yosef. So when he was little and growing up, they called him Yochanan ben Yosef. But once he became the student of the rabbi, what did I say his name was? I didn't. Let's call him Mordecai. So then he's, what was this kid's name? Yochanan ben Mordecai. He becomes the other guy's son because that's what he does. That's okay, right? So if you're the children of Yisrael, then you do what Yisrael, the guy by that name, did. What did he do? He obeyed God. How do we obey God? We do what the Torah, the written word, says. It's that simple. If you don't do that, don't call yourself a Jew. I don't care if you were born in Israel. Hebrew's your first language. If you're running around calling yourself an atheist, you are not a child of Yisrael, and that you're not a Jew. The word itself means follower of Yah. How do you do that? You live according to the Torah. It's that simple. It's not rocket science by any stretch of any imagination. It's just not. So now we know who's who. Turned it off. Oops. Sorry about that. I'm trying to keep things going. Okay. The Shabbat. Then it says, La Asot. Asa, you hear it, to make, to work, to fabricate, and that sort of thing. Et HaShabbat. That's pointing to the Shabbat. Ledorotam. That's to the generations. Berit. That's our only new word. Covenant. So called from the idea of cutting, since it was the custom in making solemn covenants to pass between the divided parts of victims, the victims being the animals, eating together, banquet among the Orientals. To eat together is almost the same as to make a covenant of friendship. Actually, it kind of was. The Hebrews, too, were accustomed to eat together when entering into a covenant. It is used of a covenant entered into between nations, because they did the same thing. Anywho, you know what a covenant is. This is Olam. It's an eternal covenant. An eternal covenant. So 16, and I'm going to have to run over today because there's only 2 left, and I'm not going to just teach 2 on 1 week. Sorry, but I'll go through them. I'm not going to push it. I won't promise to go through them quickly. So our translation, and the children of Yisrael will guard the Shabbat, to carry out the Shabbat, a perpetual covenant to their generations. You see why they're so concerned with it? Guard the Shabbat. Even Ezra, which I've spelled incorrectly, said that this means that we have to pay attention to the days of the week so that we know which day is the Shabbat. That's not bad advice, especially when you're absent-minded like me. He also said that it meant that we need to do everything on Friday needed for the Shabbat. Thus, we will not work on the Shabbat. That's actually pretty good advice. Pretty good indeed. Then it says in verse 17, literally, between me, this is God talking, between me and between children, Yisrael, sign it to eternal. For 6 days did Yahweh the skies and the land, and day the 7th rested, and he sold. So he rested his soul. So Bain, rather, trying to say children instead of between. Baini, between me, uvain, and between you. Well, not you, Benay, between the children. So God's saying, this is between me. God's saying, this is between me and the children. Wow. Aren't we supposed to say between the children and I? Well, we are. But there's none higher than God. So when he says between me, it is proper. It's not so much for us. All right, so between me, he said, and children of the Catholics. Nope. Of the Zoroastrians. No. Between me and B'nai Yisrael. Ot, it's a sign. It's a sign of something. He means it. Le'olam, an eternal sign. Just never goes away. Ki, which is before, because, then it says sheshet, which means 6, yamin. Because 6 days, asa, made, produced, manufactured, labored. This is the work that God did, of course, right? For 6 days, Yahweh. So now we know that he did something for 6 days. Et hashamayim, the skies, we can say the heaven, the firmament, that stuff that's above us, everything that's above us. Took him 6 days. The et and haaretz, everything that we're standing on, all of it. Just a way of saying that the whole universe was created in his 6 days of creation. You got to know by now that the word yom is we say day. We're not talking necessarily 24 hours. Never when we're talking about God. So on the part of the human, 6 days is 6 24-hour periods. on the part of God, 6 days can be 6 eternities to infinity and beyond, one followed by the other. Figure that one out in your head. You know what I'm saying? Because they're periods of time. And to give you an example, so you know I'm not just making something like that up, God talked about how the children of Israel, he had to suffer with them, he said, the day they were in the wilderness. Well, that day was 40 years. And he called the day of their incarceration, if you will, he called that, cool, sorry about that, I had to turn that timer off. He called that a day. That's 430 years. Called it a day because it was a period of time. All right, so then it says Ha Shevi'i, so it's on the 7th. On the 7th period of time, Shabbat, rested. Did I miss God's name somewhere? Okay, so I thought it said it twice, but I guess not. So on the 7th day, God rested. Vayinafesh, he rested his soul. Wow. So our verse 17, it will be an eternal sign between me and the children of Israel. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, and in the 7th day he rested his soul. Of the word rested, Rashi noticed that the last word is nafesh, the soul. Thus he said that there is a restoration of the soul and breath when one ceases from his work. I remember hearing a medical finding once that actually backed Rashi up. Don't ask me where it was. It was something I heard on the news. All right, so our last one. And he gave to Moshe, as completed it, to speak with him, or him, in Mountain Sinai, that's for TWO, for tablets, the testimony, for tablet stone, written in finger, God. Wow. This is cool. Va yiten, that's to give, to cause, to receive. So when God gave something to Moshe, we've already seen that it's Moshe, when he gave it to him, he handed it to him. He placed it in his hands. Wow, that's pretty cool. So he caused him to receive it. He didn't say, I'm going to give you a bag full of money and never, walk away, and Moshe never saw him again. Didn't happen like it happened to me. God actually handed him something, which would have been worth more than any. There's not a bag of money big enough on this world to be as valuable as that. That's what God handed to him. El, which means to, he handed it to Moshe. Then it says, and you all know who he is, right? The guy they call Moses. Kehaloto. It's a completed, it's finished. So he finished something. Ledaber. He completed the conversation. He said everything that needed to be said. He's told Moshe everything he needs to know. Right now, it's not like it's the last conversation they're ever going to have. It was just the end of this conversation. So after he said everything as he's going to say, he handed, didn't it say, he gave him something, right? This is, what? Caused him to receive. Ote, with it, behar, that's, be is in, har, mountain. Sinai, they say Sinai these days. Shene, 2. Lechot, two tables. I tried to say tablet and table at the same time. Did not come out right. A table, a tablet, a stone, which anything is carved or inscribed upon. This is permanent stuff, right? Ha-edut. So it's 2 stones that have the testimony inscribed on them. So the laws that God gave to Moshe that day are actually chiseled on stones somewhere. Now those stones may be crushed down to gravel by now, and we may never see them again. And then again, somebody may toss a rock into a hole in the side of the cave, hear something, go in and find those things. You never know. Don't know if they're still around. but it was the two tablets with all the law on it. Then it says lechot, that's tablets, even, of stone. Ketuvim, with the writing, it says be'etzba, in the finger, Elohim, of God. This is incredible. You know it's an idiom, right? So, there's a lot of stuff in that one word that I didn't think was all important. So our translation then is, and when he finished speaking to him on Mount Sinai, he gave to Moshe 2 tablets of stone, the testimony, written in the handwriting of God. Written in the finger is idiomatic for this stuff was written in God's own handwriting. 2 tablets. The word tablets is not actually written in plural. Rashi believed it was written in the singular because no one law was greater than the other, which is a little out there if you ask me, but that's what he said. All right, this concludes our journey through chapter 31. Shalom v'shalom, y'all. Oh.